We're getting into an education conversation and one of an international nature. And we do that this morning with Damien Paul Vassallo, who is the head of schools at the Intare Louisenlund School in Rwanda, and joins us in the hot seat this morning. Good morning, Damien.
Good morning to you as well, and thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Karibu Sana, thank you for being here this morning. Before we get into our conversation, as is our tradition here in the Situation Room, Dennis takes us around the African continent every week. He comes back with their proverbs and chocolate. I get the chocolate. You get to interpret the proverb. Okay, here we go.
We are in Libya. Mm-hmm. When you think about Libya, you think about a country that is rich in resources. So you think of the sweet crude that they have. Processing it is very easy, and that pushes the economy of the country. Unfortunately, due to war that we saw in the country, it is not where it ought to be. We know where it used to be at the time when Muammar Gaddafi was alive, but there is continuous hope that they get to bounce back. But the proverb we get from Libya: a man who buys shoes without measuring his feet is not far different from a man who's a man with eyes but with no vision. How would you interpret it?
You know, it's interesting because I'm thinking right now about our upcoming conversation, and I think so often that when we select a pathway in life, we might choose the wrong pathway, and that could mean also choosing the wrong school. So if you don't really look at the individual person, what makes them tick, what their passions are that they may not have discovered yet, what their interests are and what their needs are, you might actually choose the wrong educational pathway for them, one that doesn't fit, one that you as a parent might think is the most excellent choice because of name or prestige or something like this. But if you don't go into it with a view to the individual child, to what that child is aspiring to become, or what that child could contribute to their society, their community, and their world, without that view to the child, without that focus on the individual, you really could choose the wrong shoe, so to speak, and you really could be going into something blind without a vision. And vision is so important. I think vision with perspective, with a view on the individual, and then a view to the future and the wider world, and how that individual and their community fits into that world. So that's how I would look at that, but I'm looking at it very much through my own lens as a teacher, as an educator, and I guess that's not all that bad for this program.
Well interpreted, well said, well said.
So we're coming from the place where we're talking about international education in Africa, and when we talk about, previously we may have been guilty of wanting to pit one kind of education against another, but it looks like what we're talking about now is preparing students for a global world. How would you give an overview to that, first of all, when we talk about international education and what we're preparing students for?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, there's an obvious answer, which is that we've seen over the decades, at least in our life, that the general trend is that the world is growing together, that people have become more connected. Unfortunately, in the last decade, it seems like some of that has unraveled, and that nationalism and populism have made people retreat into their own camps or into their own tribes. And so I think that's unfortunate. But I think global education, quite simply put, is really about creating a better and more peaceful world through mutual understanding and respect. And that is a line I borrowed from the mission of the International Baccalaureate, which is the type of curriculum that my school delivers, but it really expresses something that's at the heart of what I believe and at the heart of what we do. And that comes through this appreciation of difference, this pride and cultivation of one's own heritage and culture, without necessarily undermining other cultures. In fact, with developing a greater appreciation and understanding of them. And I think that is at the heart of global competence and why international education is so important, because people are mobile, they're informed about what's going on in the world around them, sometimes through a lens that colors that information in a negative way. But I think it's very, very key that we learn to understand each other to create a lasting peace in a world where sharing and collaborating are so very important, as we're seeing right now as things play out on the world stage with those actors who oppose that kind of collaboration and seek to put their interests or the interests of their tribe first. We see how harmful that can be. And I think it's our mission to get students to say that loving your own and appreciating your own culture does not stand in opposition to loving and appreciating the other.
Yeah.
And that's what international education is really about for me. I mean, that's very general, and there's a lot to unpack there. But I think that's part of the mission of our school, although our school has a more specific vision and mission, and that's certainly part of it, and that's certainly what international education, led, I think, by the International Baccalaureate, is trying to do.
So education across Africa is changing, because we are looking at more families, more parents opening up to the idea of an international or education that is outside this continent, And one asks the question then, what is fueling these change of heart? What is making more families look at, aside from what it is we know, what it is we went through, we want our children to experience other options of education that is out there. What is fueling that?
I think, first of all, what's fueling it is more access. So, of course, if you have more options, you want to shop around and choose the best option. Also, what we just talked about before, parents are recognizing the interconnectedness. They're recognizing the importance of global competence for their children to be successful in global contexts and in global markets, but also to be personally enriched as people. But I think there's something more that's driving it. And I think, and this is probably the key part of the answer to your question, there's a discontent with what they're being offered in their own bubble or within their own national systems or local systems. And I think that this is not a problem that's specifically African. I think the same thing is happening in Europe. I think the same thing is happening across the globe. Parents are recognizing that the national curricula or the state prescribed curricula and their approach to education are outdated, they're insufficient, and that discontent and dissatisfaction with what their children are experiencing in their own schools, broadly speaking, for the most part, there are exceptions, of course. I went to public school myself, state school in the United States, and I had a great experience, but it could have been better. And I think what that discontent is built around is the fact that the approach to education that you're seeing in most schools that are part of a national curriculum, or even in some private schools across the world, is really not any different fundamentally than education that was offered in the middle of the 20th century in its approach. And in fact, some of the approaches that were offered in the century before are still in place. So people will talk the talk. They will say, we're reforming education. We're moving away from content, and we're going to focus on competencies. You hear this from almost every government across the world. They're not really putting their money where their mouth is, though, because teachers are feeling the pressure to deliver a large amount of content, and in some cases that's increasing, in other cases it's being reduced. And so this, we're doing skills and we're doing competencies, is in many ways a sideshow, or takes a back seat to the actual delivery of content, which is what the teacher means when they say, I've got to cover my curriculum for the year, because ultimately they have to take national examinations later, or another type of examinations, and they feel this immense pressure to deliver content. And the problem with a knowledge-driven or knowledge-centered learning environment is that content has to be limited to the people who've set that curriculum, and it's usually created through a cultural lens. It usually focuses on a limited amount of history, or the parameters that particular individuals who wield the power think of what is important to learn, and not necessarily what that child feels is important to learn. So back to the proverb from Libya, the shoe doesn't fit, because that child might have other interests. That child might have a composite cultural identity. Like I would say, I'm a German and an American. And so what they're being given, a content-driven curriculum that's pretty much the same with a little variation for all the students in that particular school context, is not meeting the expectations of that child. And that child will grow bored. That child will grow frustrated. That child will feel that they are not seen within that classroom. Of course, there are exceptions because there are wonderful teachers everywhere. And I want to give a shout out to my fellow educators who are on the front lines each and every day, working hard despite the structures and the systems. And I just find that international education allows us to truly center education around competencies, around concepts, the bigger ideas, around the individual child and their goals, if we're bold enough to take advantage of the flexibility of that type of curriculum. And if we're bold enough to do that, and I'll tell you, most international schools are not bold enough to do it. They still deliver a core curriculum focused on those high-stakes assessments that come later. And I think that is fueling the discontent. The personalization of learning is not happening in a way that will keep children inspired, that will keep them hungry and thirsty for knowledge, and that will keep the fire of intellectual curiosity that we are all born with. We are all born to be researchers and explorers of the world around us. And if you have children, you know that. You know how children look at the world bright-eyed, and as soon as they can speak, they're asking questions nonstop, right? So why do they stop asking questions? They stop asking questions because school bores them to death or frustrates them to death or stresses them to death. And schools can do better. We must do better, especially because our future is in many ways so uncertain, and the challenges that we face seem insurmountable. So it's not good enough to deliver a 20th century cookie cutter education to children anymore. Rather, the things that we noticed already in the early 20th century about what was wrong with school in the previous centuries, that it needs to be more experiential, that it needs to be more authentic, that it needs to be more learner-centered, that students need to take risks and learn outside of the four walls of the classroom. We have to finally do it. We've known it for over 100 years. Now it's time for us to do it. And I do think schools are doing it bit by bit, but I think our school in Rwanda is trying to do it more radically, and we need to kind of keep pushing those boundaries.
We haven't heard much about the entire Louis Lund School. So let us know that, I mean, this obviously, as you've mentioned, this is a school in Rwanda. And how are you the things that you've just mentioned, how are you doing those things to ensure that a student who walks through the corridors of that school and by the time they come out are really global ready?
I think the focus starts on creating an environment that's truly focused on the individual. So I always say there are basically two major dimensions to a child's education, the individual dimension and the social dimension. We have a lot of questions in our own head. We all have our own learning preferences. We all have our interests and our goals. We all have our limitations and our needs as well. But even those of us who think that we're the strongest type of student and who may like working independently all of the time, we have to acknowledge that learning is a social process. It takes place in dialogue. It takes place in common action. It takes place in community engagement. And so learning is fundamentally a social process. We construct our understanding of the world around us by our interactions with the environment around us. And of course, the environment around us includes the people around us. And having new perspectives and bouncing ideas off each other can help us construct our own understanding of the world around us. So I would say a school, and our school does this very intentionally, needs to focus on those two poles, the individual and the social or collaboration. And so we frame the the educational day around that. So for example, we start the week with every student meeting with their own scholastic mentor. They have, I say scholastic instead of academic because I think school has so many more dimensions than just the academic. And so they have a mentor who's basically responsible for their development together with them. Of course, the student themselves bears the primary responsibility, and we as the village all bear the responsibility. But the mentor is there to look at, they're assigned to 10 children. Okay, these 10 children they know especially well. They teach them, and so the student has 2 hours of contact time with their mentor built into their schedule, and significant opportunities each day to check in with their mentor if they need that. The mentor looks at what their interests are, what their goals are, how they're approaching their learning, helps them to set SMART goals, helps them to develop their metacognitive competence, so their strategic ability to reflect and to navigate their learning, to take ownership for their learning. And this is done through a process that feels authentic, but very intentionally uses metacognitive practice and reflective learning practices to coach these learners. So essentially the mentors are the learners' coaches. That's one of the ways we do that personalized dimension of learning. It's not the only one. The second is collaboration, the social dimension of learning in so many realms, in so many other dimensions that students will experience throughout their learning day. But let me give you one example. In our classes that we call seminars, cooperative learning is the default setting. So the default setting in most schools that you visit, by the way, even some of the best international schools or the elite schools, is a classroom that still remains rather teacher-centered, where the teacher is usually found in what's called the front of the classroom, where the students are focusing their attention on the teacher, and then the teacher will occasionally say, okay, let's break out into groups and discuss that, but we'll come back. Well, that has some of its merits, and one can do it some of the time, but I find that the more teacher-centered my classroom is, even though I think of myself as a very dynamic and engaging educator who is a good lecturer, I find that my kids disengage. And so what you need is an active classroom where learners can't just sit there passively, where they have to interact with their peers. And so cooperative learning as the default setting, have a 1 hour lesson or a 45-minute or a 90-minute lesson, and at the end of the lesson, make sure that a group of students has to produce a certain product that has to do with a learning goal, and make sure that that process is so structured that each student has to participate for that learning goal to be achieved. For example, through role assignment, through positive interdependence within those experiences. But a classroom that's abuzz with interaction, that's alive with conversation, that's alive with learning by doing, that's another approach you'll find. And I think I would add one more thing just so this answer to this question doesn't become too long, because I could talk about this all day, what our school can look like. But we are a school with a special STEM focus, and so you're going to see the laboratories as really key learning spaces, not as a place where a teacher lectures, it just looks like a laboratory, but it becomes a classroom, not as a space where the kids will then go to the lab once every 2 weeks or once a month to apply what they've been learning in the classroom, but rather as the space or the environment in which they're learning science. And by the way, let's extend that outside. We're building an agroforestry site on our campus. We have let the students create biohabitats. So the 53 hectares of our campus, those are also part of the learning environment. And I think that that's what you'll see at our school. You'll see laboratories, you'll see learning studios, you'll see design studios and workshops, you'll see art studios, you'll see the composting areal. So you have all these areas that are the new classroom, and the classroom is not just the classroom. And by the way, beyond the campus, in community engagement activities, in service learning opportunities, in entrepreneurial gatherings where our students are interacting with community experts, where they're interacting with real entrepreneurs, visiting businesses, evaluating small businesses, and things like this. This is the kind of approach to education that you'll see. And I think that what is unique about entire Louise and Lund School, because a lot of schools are aspiring to do that and are doing it partially. I think we're doing it to a really great extent, to a really significant extent. But I think this special combination of the international baccalaureate programs and the IB curriculum with this STEM focus, which we call IB plus STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, this is unique. That we're taking the top talents from around Rwanda and hopefully soon from around East Africa and across Africa. In fact, we've just had groups in for a coding and robotics camp from Cameroon, from Nigeria, from Ghana. So we do want to expand. We want parents in Kenya to be bold enough to try this approach to education with us. But I think this is really the way that we're pushing the boundaries to make learning more authentic, to make it student-centered, and to take it beyond those four walls of the rectangular classroom, which is so 19th century. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, I mean, just to look at then who the school is producing, we're talking about cementing a future through an international education. And just really quickly, one of the things that you spoke about was, all of these ingredients. The classroom now is beyond the four walls and looking into all of this. Who then has come out on the other end of this conveyor belt, as it were, and how are you delivering them to the world to show that what you put in is actually achieving the required or desired results?
Sure. So to speak to that, I have to qualify something. Our school is a startup school. So we've been open for 2 years in Rwanda. Our vision is a lot older than that, and the partnerships that we have with other schools are a lot longer than that. But we only have right now 2 cohorts, and we're going to add a cohort each year until we have all 6 years of secondary school in Rwanda at our school. So right now, we have basically a grade 7 and a grade 8 cohort who have just graduated on to grades 8 and 9, and we have a new grade 7 cohort coming in. So for the upcoming school year, 3 year groups. And so none of our students have graduated from our school yet. And so we can't produce IB results for you or Harvard and Cambridge acceptance letters. But what we can say is that some of our learners have already risen as individuals to great achievements.
Okay.
So we had one of our students, for example, become Miss Nerd Rwanda for her project, which was an app for breast cancer detection for women in underserved communities, and that was recognized. And she won that particular competition nationally and was able to go on to an international competition in that regard. We've had several students score with honors in the Stimulate International Competition. We had one student qualify for the Global Math Olympiad in Rome already, and we had multiple students make it into the final round. In fact, well over 100 students made it into the final round for the Math Olympiad nationally in Rwanda. So we're already seeing excellent results. In NWEA map testing, which is a kind of global standardized test that's based in the United States but used throughout the world, our students outperformed even Chinese students on average in mathematics. So we can show that we're on a good trajectory. What I will say is our sister school, Louise and Lund in Germany, where I was the principal of the international school for nearly a decade, and I worked at that school for over a decade in school leadership. That school has demonstrated that since we've shifted to these more learner-centered approaches to education, particularly in the academic context, that results have trended upward. And in fact, this past year, the cohort that graduated from Louise and Lund scored the highest results on the IB diploma program examinations that the school has ever scored, and those scores were significantly above the world average. So we can say that this approach to learning that we have, which many people would argue is risky because you have high-stakes assessments that are externally marked, that are designed externally afterwards. So you have to meet a global standard, or in some cases, a national standard. You could say, well, how can we do this if we're being so experimental, if we're giving students so much agency, if we're redefining what the classroom is? How do we deliver all the content so they can still perform? Well, the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is the results that Louise and Lund has delivered after using this approach for 6 years consistently in its IB World School and for a few years in its German secondary school, which also just recently had top results. So it seems to be working. We believe in it strongly, and I really don't think it has to be an either or. We often think, ooh, how do I deliver my academic content? How do I prepare kids for examinations? While at the same time giving them all these soft skills, all these, to use a cliche, 21st century skills like creativity and problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills, collaboration skills. How do we do that? How do we do both? And I would say if you promote these kind of skills, if you promote student ownership, if you find out what they're curious about and allow them to build their learning program to the greatest extent possible around those passions and interests, you will see better results because they will be more invested in their learning. We have to realize as educators, just because I cover my curriculum, just because I deliver my content, doesn't mean that students are actually internalizing it or actually integrating it into their understanding and their lives. They may have been in your classroom when you covered the unit on analyzing the German romantics and literature, but they may have been half asleep. And they also may have been glad to get it out of their system once they took your examination, which, by the way, they probably only scored at a pretty mediocre level on anyway, just enough to pass. And then it's forgotten, it's over and done with. That's not the kind of learning we want. So I would say let's be bold as educators. Let's take our learners seriously, find out what they're interested in, and find out what they need, find out what they want to achieve, and see how we can work with the curricular framework we have to structure their learning around that, and see how that jives or harmonizes or syncs with the other learners in their group so that they can learn from each other, and so that the social aspect of learning is not missing.
I mean, we're looking at students getting into a world that is artificial intelligence, emerging technologies, and new industry heavy. And with that, then schools have no option but to adapt to what is running in the market right now and prepare these kids pretty much for a world that will be ready to accept them in. So then how do schools shift and adapt to what it is we see today?
Yeah, so it may be counterintuitive, and the second part of your question will be the more obvious, the second part of my answer to your question will be the more obvious response. But the first part is, and what I think is key, is in this changing world that's becoming increasingly reliant on artificial intelligence, increasingly digital, increasingly technology focused, increasingly virtual, I think it's so important that we focus on the human, right? So I think a fundamental part of a school's approach to education, and this will be really counterintuitive coming from the head of a STEM-focused school, is to say, let's not necessarily put the technology at the center first. Let's put the human skills at the center first. Let's cultivate students' social skills, their communication skills, their self-management skills, which also translate through social and emotional learning into their social and emotional skills in their interaction with others. Let's also not forget the spirit. You know, it's interesting, we're a STEM school, we're an international school, we're not a church school, but we have opportunities for promoting spirituality throughout the week at our school. We have religious services for various groups at the school so that students have access to them. There are Bible studies, there are groups for students to meet for catechesis, for prayer, etc. So let's cultivate the human. Let's make sure kids have opportunities to talk with each other, to collaborate with each other in a psychomotor way, in a physical way, to engage with nature, to have experiential education that's not just virtual. The other side of the coin is they have to know the technology. They have to know ICT. They have to know how to program. They have to understand how generative AI works and how they can be manipulated by it so that they can become masters of this technology and not addicts of it, have mastery over it and not be mastered by it. And so that's all built into our program as well. In fact, the STEM modules that you will see that are project-based, where we have students learning in the labs for 4 hours at a time or engaging on on-site work outside of the laboratories. These are very much focused on these kind of technologies that are necessary. 75 of our students are involved in coding. 75 of our students are involved in robotics. We have a cybersecurity module. We have a cybersecurity curriculum and an AI curriculum. So my students already know much more at the age of 13 and 14 about generative AI and how it works and what some of the dangers and pitfalls are than I do. And we're using technology, EdTech, intentionally to give them the best possible experience of learning. But that has to live in this dynamic and in this tension with promoting those human skills. And so, for example, our students only have their mobile phones on them on Thursday evenings and Sunday afternoons. The rest of the week at boarding school, there's no access to that phone. There's no access to Instagram and to all the other social media platforms that can become their pitfall and can lead to this addiction. But they all work with a kind of tablet laptop hybrid. We have a learning management system. Many of our resources are digitalized. There are tons of educational tools and learning softwares that they're using. And so they are, as digital natives, becoming highly digitally competent and tech savvy at a level that our teachers are struggling to keep up with. And so we're giving them those tools and those skills so that as soon as they leave our school and go into the academy, I think they'd actually be ready for the workforce. They're already programming apps that are useful. We have a lost and found app at our school. It was programmed by one of our 7th graders, right? And it's working. It's working in an excellent way. We actually had one disciplinary issue. I shouldn't talk about this, but we were so impressed by the student's ability to break through a certain firewall that we decided this student needs to be promoted because they have such incredible potential that we've got to harness that potential for good. We've got to harness their skills for good and make sure that they're not getting bored in a school where they have this need or this drive to actually become a hacker, right? But rather make them a tech expert, make them an innovator, make them a designer of future technology that can contribute positively to human beings' experience of the world and to tackling those big challenges that we're facing, like climate change, among other things.
How do you ensure that a global education is achieved while still being plugged into a local or community reality?
Yes, I love that question because it was something that we thought of immediately. I mean, obviously, when I was asked to come to Rwanda from Germany as an American who's become a German by choice, I was very hesitant. I was thinking, oh, this sounds like a little bit like neocolonialism. What am I going down to do as the white male setting up a school in Rwanda? Why don't we help them do it themselves, which we are to a degree. It was very important for me to have a lot of local partners invested in the project, and it was very important to me to put that accent on Rwandan heritage, Rwandan traditions and culture, and the broader East African traditions and culture as part of the school curriculum and as part of the school programming. I think that it's also, in this case, dangerous to frame it as an either-or. So people can say, ooh, international schools have the pitfall of not promoting the local culture or ignoring it. And that certainly happens a lot. But if international education is done well, then the contextual lenses through which we learn are the individual. So they focus on that individual's identity and culture and language are the local, so there's the local lens as well that focuses on the community and the immediate society, and the global lens. So all three lenses are key. In fact, those are the three lenses that are required in the IB's updated version of their middle years program for learners. And so if you're doing culture well, and international education well, you're promoting learners' appreciation of diversity, which includes an appreciation of their own culture. If we want to be very concrete about it, we promote at our school, for example, traditional dance. We have a Rwandan Heritage Club. We have a Rwandan Heritage Day. We have an African Culture Day. We have an appreciation for the African culinary tradition. We engage actively with community experts. We share our campus with lots of surrounding organizations, community organizations, schools, learning centers, etc. We have football teams from other African nations come and practice on our field, for example. So there's a big sense in which our school, although it's an international school, is very authentically African, very authentically Rwandan, rooted in the traditions and the heritage of that country and affirming of it. And another way you do it is when you design your curriculum, you build in texts and topics that are relevant to the culture. So you have them doing an interdisciplinary unit, for example, where Imigongo is the focus. Rwandan folk art is the focus, where we're looking at geometric patterns within it, and we're taking a mathematical focus, and they're producing it from an artistic or designer's perspective, affirming their culture, learning a lot of different subjects in an interdisciplinary way, and still at the same time learning a lot about other cultures, because other texts and topics and contexts will be represented in their curriculum. And that is the balance. So I would say to educators, if you feel there's a risk of neglecting the local culture, then do both boldly and intentionally. And actually, if you're doing international education properly, you're already doing both.
Yeah.
You cannot not affirm the local identity and heritage and do international education well.
Traditional education has had more emphasis on grades, has had more emphasis on examination and academic achievements. But we look at students nowadays who are looking at their creativity, more into leadership, critical thinking as part and parcel of what makes a human being whole. How critical is that in international or even just education system as a whole?
Yeah, I think we desperately need to shift our focus, not away from academics, but we need to understand curriculum more broadly. We need to see that it encompasses other dimensions of our being beyond the cognitive. I've already mentioned the psychomotor. Let's think about the affective, our emotions, our social and emotional learning. We have to be able to think about school more broadly, first of all. Second of all, it's also not an either or, right? Promoting skills like collaboration, critical thinking, leadership, which has agency and ownership built into it, collaboration. If we promote those skills, I believe that results, even on conventional assessments, will turn out to be better, because learners will be more skilled to approach their learning as more matured, more aware, self-aware learners. The more they understand about themselves, the more they understand about their peers, the better they're going to be able to attack, to engage with curricular content, and then master those assessments, whether they be more traditional or whether they be more creative. Fortunately, I think that the IB, which is actually in many ways known for very high-stakes examinations and being very exam-focused, has gotten the message and has developed programs already, like the middle years program and the primary years program, which, though they have examinations, are also very, very focused on authentic assessment and give schools a lot of freedom to choose the type or the best way of assessing learners' learning, or giving learners the best possible way to demonstrate their learning based on who they are, for example, through demonstrations in the laboratory, through exhibitions, through performances, performance-based assessment, through portfolios and journaling. I mean, there are so many different ways that students can demonstrate what they've learned beyond the paper exam, but the paper exam can also be more authentic, right? Or the e-assessment can also be more authentic in that it gets students to engage with text, topics, or models that are very, very close to reality and produce a product, though it be written on a page or entered into a box on an e-assessment digitally, that it has a great relevance for the skill sets that they're trying to develop and for their future. And so I think that you don't have to be worried, teachers and school leaders, about sacrificing time on the curriculum to promote the kinds of skills that you mentioned, which I think very much fit within that category of 21st century skills, soft skills. I think if students master those, they're going to perform better anyway, and we already have some data which shows that, data coming out of our own schools which shows that, because levels of engagement are heightened. And when we talk about the emotional side of learning, there's a neurologist and an educational expert, Mary Helen Imordino Yang, who I love. She talks about that the fact that when the emotions are activated within our brain, when students actually activate that part of their brain that's used for fight or flight, if you can manage to do that within their learning environment, within their learning context, even within the classroom, then you will create more lasting, more sustainable learning. Because the brain will, in fact, internalize that experience more. The brain will work to create schemata that actually integrate that learning and maintain it and make it applicable to other situations. And so we have to create a learning experience for our students and a learning environment that's inspiring, that's motivating, that's engaging, that's also emotionally challenging. Let's get them indignant about a certain injustice, right? Yeah. Because if they feel that kind of the fire of righteous indignation and they debate passionately and craft arguments around advocating for their particular position on a topic or a text or within the context of a debate, that's an experience they're not going to forget, and they're probably going to build on it because it inspires them to take that learning further, to ask new questions, etc. So yes, let's move away from this idea of a focus on delivering content and even partially skills to make sure high-stakes assessment are met. Let's be bold enough to promote 21st century skills, not at the sake of content, but let's allow students also to choose their own content. Let's tell them what bigger ideas they should master, what concepts are necessary for them to master. Let's lead them to the skills that we believe that they'll need to know, but let's also listen to them. What kind of skills do you want to learn? And what kind of content framework can we help you build through EdTech, through the learning management system and the other softwares that we're using, so you can personalize your experience of learning, so you can still master your IBE assessment or later your diploma program examinations or your Cambridge examinations or whatever the system is. You can still master those, but still develop the skills that everyone says are necessary and everyone agrees are necessary to navigate this new century and still new century and ages to come, generations to come beyond that.
I mean, there's a lot to go. There's a lot to then be able to learn and to understand, and to hear it coming from you in that manner is definitely what a lot of folks can pick up from. Really quickly, as our time goes to an end, one of the concerns about international education is the cost of it. How do you then meter those?
Sure. Well, first of all, and I think that's very legitimate, because I wouldn't say our school is cheap, but I would say that you're getting a lot for your money at our school. And I have to take my hat off to the government of Rwanda in this case, because they've invested a lot in our school and they invest a lot in education. Education is really valued in Rwanda and probably in many other African nations in a way that it's not in the West, in the global North, because a lot of people in the West, in the global North, take it for granted. It's seen as something that's there, that's accessible, and that is even burdensome to young people. And I have experienced a completely different attitude toward the value of education in Rwanda. And so there is a sense in which parents and institutions, including the government, are prepared to invest in ways that are extremely admirable. That having been said, the cost of our school for full boarding and all these programs, which I won't name as a figure on this program, is a fraction of what you would pay, I'm sorry to say, right here in Nairobi at those top schools. Maybe not a fraction, but it's certainly less than half.
Okay.
And it is a fraction of what learners are paying in the United States and Germany for the same product. The other thing I would say is that we intentionally create pathways to higher education at our school that will make the road ahead more affordable. So a lot of parents are saying, I want my child to have the opportunity to go to that wonderful, excellent, elite university, and that's going to cost a lot of money, so I can't invest that money in school now. Well, one of the pathways, as an example that we're creating, is because of our school's Germany connection, all of our learners are required to learn German. We have already built a partnership with one German university, and we're working on several others. Our school, sister school, Louisenlund, is either the top or the second best in the rankings. That we're definitely the best school in the country, in Germany, and is well connected with many institutions of higher learning and many research institutions. And so we're creating networks and pathways for our learners to go to university and do their degree in Germany if they want to. And do you know what higher education in Germany costs? Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing. Right. So that's one of the
another
answers.
conversation that we could have.
For affordability, it distinguishes our school from a lot of the other schools because they create pathways to Britain and America, etc., where universities are expensive. And we certainly, some of our learners will get scholarships, we hope, to MIT and Cambridge and Oxford. But we are not banking on that. We're banking on a pathway that's feasible for our learners. Invest in your child's education today. There'll be a payback tomorrow. When they go. When they have the opportunity to go to Europe if they choose that pathway.
Damien Paul Vassallo is the head of school at the Intare Louisenlund School in Rwanda. Thank you for sharing this insight with us this morning and being in the Situation Room.
I appreciate the opportunity to do so, and it's been lovely getting to know you and conversing with you on this critical topic.
Indeed. For everybody who's on the Situation Room this morning, thank you for being here. We'll talk again tomorrow, God willing. Have a good rest of the day. Keep it SpiceFM. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.